because there is a big difference between ab training and core training. That's the thing people often forget, is I would say core training is more for stability, injury prevention, and all that kind of good stuff. Ab training I typically associate more with hypertrophy, of building and developing that midsection from an aesthetic standpoint. Again, you know what I'm going to say, the raffle is still live, so if you want to be entered into a raffle for the chance to win either 2 free months of coaching with me on a one-to-one basis online, a program written by me tailored towards your goals and your needs, or even just potentially get a free workout guide or multiple workout guides depending, then all you have to do is go on the TFNL website, which is linked down below under the description, purchase a workout guide, and that automatically enters you into the raffle to win one of those things. And if you fancy it, at the bottom of that webpage you'll see a box to subscribe to the mailing list. If you are subscribed to the mailing list, you're probably going to get given some discount codes and offers in there, which you could apply to the workout guides to save you a little bit of dollar. So that's going to be running through February if you care. But until then, GainsByBrains, weekly cardio and abs. And I want to present something a bit different. Oftentimes I speak about resistance training very much from a just lifting weights perspective. I don't really touch on cardio much, nor do I touch on abs too much. I do occasionally, but nothing too crazy. So I'm going to provide some slightly different insights about cardio training and ab training.
Today we are doing a cardio and ab workout involving the Stairmaster. At the beginning of my fitness journey, I didn't really do cardio because my goal was to become stronger and build muscle, so doing cardio regularly didn't really cross my mind.
Cardio is not bad for gains. Cardio does not kill your gains. Cardio does not stop you building muscle and make you small or whatever. Realistically, that's just going to come from energy. If you are doing extra cardio, you probably need to eat extra calories to make up for that potential energy deficit you're putting yourself in, because obviously we know you lose weight, calorie deficit, gain weight, calorie surplus, and you're more likely to gain muscle mass in a surplus. Therefore, if you are doing cardio, you may, due to the extra expenditure of energy, may have to eat a little bit more to keep you in that surplus. The other thing is the Stairmaster. Personally, myself, not a massive fan of it, because when you're like incline walking, for example, the fatigue is relatively low. You're not working muscles too extensively. Your calves may get a bit battered, but if you're like me and you skip your calf training and have done for many years, I'm glad my coach doesn't watch my videos because he'd be very angry with me. The calves get a bit battered. When it comes to the Stairmaster, you've got to think about when you're actually going through the Stairmaster motion, not only are you exerting a lot of energy, which is great because obviously you're trying to burn calories, but also your quads are going to get quite fatigued and your glutes are going to get quite fatigued as well. They're not going to get fatigued in a hypertrophy sense, meaning walking on the Stairmaster will not encourage mass amounts of glute growth or quad growth like resistance training would, but more fatigued in the sense that they could actually burn out quite quickly and potentially hinder recovery, which could then in turn take away from your quad and glute training externally. So for most people, I typically say, if you enjoy the Stairmaster, 100% you can do it. That's completely up to you. But if you don't, there are other options, and we look for ones that are typically low fatigue, so they don't take away from your actual resistance training sessions and are simply used as a means of caloric expenditure. If you haven't already, please do consider clicking the red button down below to subscribe to the YouTube channel, as I would very much appreciate it.
For those of you who dread cardio, starting with shorter and probably more intense sessions can be a good way to start, because remember, the key is consistency, and therefore you have to figure out what works best for you, what you enjoy doing, because that will make it so much easier.
Valid. I actually fully agree with this. I think realistically, it's all well and good me saying, oh, this is the best cardio plan for you. This is the best one in the world. But if you hate it and don't stick to it, it's probably not the best for you at all. The best one for you is probably the one that you can remain most consistent with, as consistency is actually going to be pretty fundamentally important when you look at longevity and also progression. When it comes to achieving your goals, you want to get there in the most consistent means possible. You're probably going to get there in a healthy and sustainable way if done so consistently. Whereas if you hate what you're doing, it's probably not going to be particularly healthy for you. And it's probably not going to be very sustainable. So again, find what you like to do and do more of it, provided it is healthy and allows you to reach your goals in such a manner. And no, you actually don't need to do mass amounts of cardio if you want to lose weight. I'm going to throw it out there. I typically believe a lot of people can lose their desired weight if that's a goal of theirs, if they lift weights, walk a bit more and eat less food. Because realistically, if you think about how many calories you burn running, let's say a mile, probably not that many calories. And the calories you do burn in running a mile, which may take you up to 10 minutes perhaps, you could actually replenish those calories so quickly just by eating a few cookies. So it's much easier to eat calories than it is to burn calories, because the body is so efficient. Therefore, it might actually be easier to maybe reduce food a bit and then use cardio as that kind of top up. Again, you can only reduce food so much, so you may have to do cardio to kind of fill in that gap. But I typically do say it's much easier to eat less than it is to burn more. but finding a combination of two is probably a pretty good idea. And then we look at the ab movements themselves, and this is going to be interesting. Please don't shout at me. So movements like this, where you're maintaining that kind of roll in the spine, yes, you are going to maintain a contraction in the abs, but for when it comes to building the abs, and you have to remember, the abs are like any other muscle, and when we're looking at kind of building a more developed six-pack region, we are going to do so from the context of hypertrophy. You do want to go through a range of motion ideally. So although you do get a contraction doing this, a lot of the movement and the range of motion here is coming more from the hip flexors than it is from the abdominal region. I'm not saying don't do it, I'm just simply saying it might actually be better just to do a crunch variation. When you have a V-sit like this, the abs are definitely going to be more involved, but again, you are still getting the hip flexors thrown into the mix due to that leg lifting situation that's occurring. And also you question, because you are fully coming off the ground, could this limit how much spinal flexion is occurring? And what I mean by that is how much your spine is rolling, because you are probably going to maintain a bit more of an extended spine when doing a V-sit versus if you were just doing a crunch, where you might flex a lot more. And again, when looking at training the abs, we do really want to think about reducing the distance between the sternum and the pelvis, and that can be done by rolling your spine. So no, keep your flat and straight back isn't necessarily actually the best thing for everything. When it comes to ab training, it's actually the opposite. You want to actually roll your back and reduce that range of motion as much as possible. And that's also actually the same reason why I'm not a massive fan of the sit-up, because we're maintaining a relatively consistent spine kind of positioning here. There is some flexion occurring, but there could probably be more. Or if there couldn't be more, you could get similar results going through less of a range of motion. Therefore, you could essentially achieve the same doing less. So I think in these cases, what I would actually prefer is keeping things really simple and just doing crunch variations, reverse crunch variations, where you're kind of reducing the distance, or maybe even hanging leg raise variations where you're still bringing the pelvis up. Movements like this, very different. We're not looking at abdominal development here. We are looking at things like anti-rotation, for example, which is going to be really handy, not so much from a developmental perspective, but more from an injury prevention perspective when you're looking at people who deadlift a lot. So if you deadlift, you probably mix grip. In doing so, you are going to encourage some slight rotation. Doing anti-rotation movements like side plank variations, like pal-off press, things like that, are going to be really helpful for preventing that rotation from occurring, which in turn could help prevent injuries. Because there is a big difference between ab training and core training. That's the thing people often forget, is I would say core training is more for stability, injury prevention, and all that kind of good stuff. Ab training I typically associate more with hypertrophy, of building and developing that midsection from an aesthetic standpoint. With the Russian twist, for example, I'm not a massive fan, because we are looking at working the obliques through the twisting motion. But firstly, there is no resistance being used here, therefore progressive overload intensity going to be a bit limited. And also, do you want to develop the obliques from a hypertrophy perspective? Because in doing so, because the obliques do run across to the side of the abs, over developing the obliques may give you the appearance of a thicker waist. And oftentimes people actually want to have the appearance of a thinner waist. Therefore, direct hypertrophy based oblique training might not necessarily be the best course of action, which is why I do typically avoid rotation based movements myself and focus more on anti-rotation based movements. When it comes to actually, let's say, effective ab training, my favorite movement, hands down, probably the rope crunch. Following that, I probably look at hanging leg raise. Following that, you can look at other crunch variations or reverse crunch variations, but I do actually keep it really simple. Again, I don't think it needs to be more complex than that. From a core training perspective, it's a different story. When we look at injury prevention, we're looking at performance carryover. I'm looking less at the aesthetic side of things. I'm looking more at the functional and applicable side of things. I would look at plank variations, so maybe plank with arm reach, things like that, where it will encourage rotation that you're trying to fight, thus then helping you encourage anti-rotation. I look at pal-off press, I look at side planks, I look at Copenhagen planks. I'd also look at things like dead bugs, which although aren't a very taxing movement for the abdominal region, I do personally find them to be pretty handy when it comes to general kind of midsection health, especially when looking at your lower back as well. We're looking at not only just functional, but also prehab and rehab potentially as well. So preventing injury and also recovering from injury, things along those lines. Again, when it comes to that applicable perspective, we're looking at movements that will have a carryover to what you're actually doing regarding performance. So for example, when you're doing a squat under load, you're not going through many repetitions of a crunch-based movement. You're maintaining tension and tightness in this abdominal region to then carry over to core bracing, which doesn't really have much relevance to a rope crunch. It's going to be more relevant to something where you're holding a contracted and tense or braced position, we should say, like potentially a plank variation or a side plank variation, something along those lines. When we look at the deadlift, like I mentioned earlier, there may be rotation occurring. Again, to combat that, you can hook grip or you can use straps, things to avoid mixed grip, because again, if you are mixed gripping, you may rotate. then obviously I said you can combat that through anti-rotation based movements, because one of the functions of the obliques is not only just rotation, but also anti-rotation. So like I said, side plank, Palloff press, things along those lines. And then obviously I know people are going to talk about, oh, but what about the transverse abdominis? Yes, again, that's another story for another day. You can certainly work that, but you have to kind of question why. I'm not saying you shouldn't. I ask you what your reasons are. So you might say, I want to train my abdominal region for aesthetic purposes, then you'll train that appropriately for that. I want to train the core for performance purposes, then you'll train it appropriately for that. I might want to train my transverse abdominis for whatever reason that may be. Again, then you would train it appropriately for that, which then actually in turn can be worked heavily through things like dead bugs, bird dogs, potentially plank variations as well. So it does kind of interlink a lot more seemingly with core training than maybe aesthetic ab training will say. So you have to ask yourself why you're doing what you're doing first, which will then help you determine what you should be doing to achieve what you want to achieve. So figure out why you're training the abs or the core, then program movements that align with what you're trying to achieve, be that stability, prehab, aesthetics, whatever it may be. But again, do remember when it comes from an aesthetic perspective, to see the abs, we typically need to be leaner, therefore our body fat percentage needs to be lower. So that's also a consideration. All I would just finish up and say, if you're going to do cardio, I would typically do so after resistance training, if not on another day. Because if you do it before, it may take away from your resistance training session, where if you do resistance training, that's probably not going to take away from your cardio session. And it also depends what's most important to you. For me, resistance training would be most important, so I'll prioritize that first and maybe do cardio for caloric expenditure afterwards. It really is up to you, your goals, and what makes you happiest. So let me know in the comment section below your favorite ab movements and also whether you do cardio or not, because I certainly don't, when I probably should, let's be honest. Thank you for tolerating me. Thank you for tolerating my thoughts and opinions on cardio and abs, and thank you for tolerating the video.